I have worked as a night shift dispatcher for the Cedarbrook Police Department for 4 years. I moved back to my hometown after a failed attempt at city life, and the job suited me. I find comfort in routine, in the predictable rhythm of quiet nights, punctuated by occasional domestic disturbances and noise complaints. Cedarbrook is a small town in the rural Midwest, population around 8,000, the kind of place where nothing much happens and everyone prefers it that way. My name is Kevin Marsh. I am 29 years old, and I need to tell you what happened to my town before it happens to yours. I was working alone on the night the first alert came through. My partner, a woman named Louise, who usually handles the overnight shift with me, had called in sick. It was a Wednesday, around 11 at night, and the dispatch center was quiet. I had been reading a paperback novel, something I did often on slow nights, when every phone in the building began to ring simultaneously. Not just the dispatch lines. Every phone. The desk phones, the emergency lines, even my personal cell phone in my pocket. All of them screaming at once with that shrill electronic tone that makes your teeth ache. Before I could answer any of them, the emergency broadcast system activated on every screen in the building. You know that familiar tone that precedes weather warnings and amber alerts, that 3-note sequence everyone recognizes. But what followed was not in English. The letters were from an alphabet I did not recognize. They looked almost familiar, like they might be Cyrillic or Greek or some other script I had seen before. But the longer I looked at them, the more certain I became that they were none of those things. The characters seemed to shift slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye, as though they were not entirely stable on the screen. The audio that accompanied the text was even more disturbing. A voice, clearly synthesized in the way emergency broadcasts always are, spoke in a language that sounded like nothing I had ever heard. It was not harsh or guttural, not melodic or flowing. It simply sounded wrong, like someone had taken the concept of language and rebuilt it from scratch without understanding how human speech was supposed to work. The broadcast lasted for approximately 90 seconds. When it ended, the phones stopped ringing. The screens returned to normal. I sat in the sudden silence, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that what I had just witnessed was some kind of technical malfunction. Then the calls started coming in. Within minutes, the dispatch lines lit up with calls from residents across Cedarbrook. Everyone had received the alert. It had appeared on televisions, phones, radios, even the digital billboard outside the hardware store on Main Street. I took call after call from frightened and confused townspeople, all asking the same questions I could not answer. What was that? What language was that? What does it mean? I tried contacting the county emergency management office, but no one answered. I tried the state emergency services line and was put on hold for 20 minutes before being disconnected. I even tried calling the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but the automated system kept redirecting me in circles. By 2 in the morning, the calls had tapered off. People seemed to have convinced themselves it was a glitch, a hack, some kind of prank by teenagers with too much technical knowledge and not enough sense. I wanted to believe that too. But something about the voice on that broadcast stayed with me, echoing in my memory in a way that made my skin crawl. I finished my shift at 7 in the morning and drove home as the sun rose over Cedar Brook. I told myself I would sleep, forget about it, and by the time I returned to work that night, everyone would have moved on. I was wrong. I tried to sleep that day but found it impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice, those sounds that were almost words but not quite. I gave up around noon and drove into town to get coffee, hoping that being around other people would shake the unease that had settled into my bones. Cedar Brook looked the same as always. The same small downtown with its hardware store and diner and post office. The same people going about their daily routines. But something felt different. I could not put my finger on it at first, but as I sat in the diner drinking my coffee, I began to notice small things. The conversations around me seemed muted, not quiet exactly, but lacking the usual energy. People spoke to each other in short sentences, their eyes distant, their smiles not quite reaching their faces. The waitress, who had known me since I was a child, served me without the usual small talk. Just a nod and a cup of coffee placed silently on the counter. I watched an elderly man sit at the counter and stare at his phone for 15 minutes without touching his food. When I glanced at the screen, I saw he was looking at the emergency alert. Not a recording of it, but the alert itself, still displayed on his phone as though it had never ended. I left the diner feeling more unsettled than when I arrived. The second alert came that evening, around 7, while I was getting ready for my shift. I was in my apartment, standing in the kitchen, when every device in my home activated at once. My television, my phone, my laptop, even the old radio on my kitchen counter that I had not turned on in months. The same tone, the same strange text, the same voice speaking in that impossible language. But this time, the broadcast was longer. Nearly 3 minutes of that synthesized voice delivering what sounded like instructions or perhaps warnings in words that no human mind could pass. I stood frozen in my kitchen, watching the characters scroll across my television screen, and felt something I had not experienced since childhood. Pure, primal fear. When the broadcast ended, I noticed something new. The final image on the screen, displayed for just a few seconds before everything returned to normal, was a map. It showed Cedar Brook and the surrounding area, with a single location marked in red. I recognized it immediately. It was the old water treatment facility on the edge of town, abandoned for nearly 20 years after the new plant was built. I did not know what the broadcast was telling me, but I knew with absolute certainty that I did not want to go to that place. Over the following days, I noticed subtle but unmistakable changes in the people of Cedar Brook. It was not that they were acting strangely, exactly. They still went to work, still shopped at the grocery store, still waved hello when they passed each other on the street. But there was a quality to their behavior that felt rehearsed, like they were performing the actions of normal life without fully inhabiting them. Conversations had become shorter. People answered questions with single words when they used to ramble. They smiled at appropriate moments, but the smiles faded too quickly, as though someone had pressed a button to turn them on and then off again. My co-worker Louise returned to work, but seemed different. She had always been chatty, filling the quiet overnight hours with stories about her grandchildren and complaints about her husband. Now she sat in silence for hours at a time, staring at her computer screen, occasionally typing something I could not see. When I asked her about the alert, she looked at me with an expression that made my blood run cold. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something that looked like pity. "You will understand soon," she said. "Everyone understands eventually." She did not elaborate, and I did not ask again. The alerts continued over the next week, coming at irregular intervals but with increasing frequency. Sometimes there would be 2 in a day, sometimes none for 36 hours, then 3 in rapid succession. Each one was different. The strange text shifted, the voice delivered what might have been different messages, though without understanding the language, I had no way to know. Each alert included a map at the end. Sometimes it showed the water treatment plant. Sometimes it showed other locations. The old elementary school that had been converted to a community center. The cemetery on the hill overlooking town. The radio tower that stood at the highest point in the county. I noticed that after each alert, a few more people seemed to change. The shift was subtle, but cumulative. Where once the majority of Cedar Brook had seemed normal, with a few acting strangely, the ratio was now reversed. I found myself in the minority, one of the few residents who still seemed fully present, fully human in a way I could not quite define. I tried to talk to people about it, but the conversations went nowhere. Those who had changed simply smiled and told me not to worry. Those who had not changed yet were too frightened to discuss it, as though speaking about the alerts might accelerate whatever process was taking hold of the town. I do not know what compelled me to investigate the water treatment plant. Perhaps it was the need to understand what was happening. Perhaps it was the hope that finding the source might somehow stop it. Or perhaps it was something else, some subtle pull that I did not fully recognize until it was too late. I drove out to the facility around 10 at night, parking my car on the access road and walking the last quarter mile on foot. The building loomed in the darkness, a hulking concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fence, topped with rusted barbed wire. The gate was open, hanging slightly askew, as though someone had forced it recently. Inside the fence, the ground was covered with footprints. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all leading toward the main building. The tracks were fresh, made within the last few days based on the lack of debris covering them. Someone, many someones, had been coming here. I approached the main entrance, a heavy metal door that stood partially open. From inside, I could hear something, not voices exactly, but a sound that reminded me of the emergency broadcasts, that same quality of almost language, of meaning that existed just beyond the reach of comprehension. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The main processing room, a vast space filled with pipes and tanks and control panels, had been cleared of debris. The floor had been swept clean, and in the center of the room stood a structure that made no sense. It was made of electronics, televisions, radios, phones, computers, all of them stacked and arranged in a deliberate configuration. Wires connected everything, running between devices in ways that should not have allowed them to function. And yet, they were all on, all displaying the same thing, all speaking in unison. The emergency alert played on every screen, the strange text scrolling endlessly, the synthesized voice filling the cavernous space with its impossible language. But here, surrounded by the cacophony of 100 devices, I heard something I had not noticed before. There was a rhythm to it, not something that could be decoded or analyzed, but a cadence that felt almost like a heartbeat. The voice rose and fell, the text pulsed brighter and dimmer, and I felt my own pulse begin to synchronize with it. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to look away. The longer I listened, the more I began to understand. Not the words themselves, but the intent behind them. The broadcast was not a warning or an instruction. It was an invitation. Louise found me there. She had apparently followed me. She stood in the doorway, her face lit by the glow of 100 screens, and smiled at me with genuine warmth. "You came," she said. "I knew you would. You are one of the ones who needed to see it first." She led me deeper into the facility, through corridors I had not explored, to a room that had once been the administrative offices. Inside, I found people, dozens of them, seated in rows of folding chairs, all facing a wall covered with more screens. I recognized many of them. The waitress from the diner, the elderly man who had stared at his phone, my neighbors, my co-workers, people I had known my entire life. They sat in perfect stillness, their eyes fixed on the screens, their lips moving slightly as though speaking along with the broadcast. Louise guided me to an empty chair and gestured for me to sit. The urge to comply was overwhelming. My body seemed to move without my permission, lowering itself into the seat before I could think to resist. She sat beside me and took my hand. "Do not be afraid," she said. "This is how it begins. This is how we become ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. "For them to arrive," she said. "For us to welcome them home." Louise explained what she understood, speaking in fragments I struggled to piece together. The alerts were not random. They were not a malfunction or a prank. They were a signal broadcast from somewhere beyond human understanding, meant to prepare the people of Cedarbrook for what was coming. She told me the language in the alerts was not new. It was ancient, older than any human civilization, older than humanity itself. It was the language of those who had once inhabited this place long before the town existed, long before people existed at all. They had left, gone somewhere else, somewhere far away, but they had always intended to return. The alerts were their announcement, their way of saying that the waiting was over. Those who heard the alerts and accepted them were being changed, their minds slowly restructured to understand the language, to welcome what was coming. It was not painful, she assured me. It was beautiful, like waking up from a dream you had not realized you were having. I asked, why me? Why was I still myself when everyone else had changed? Because you are stubborn, Louise said with something like affection. Because you fight everything, but you cannot fight this. None of us can. And when you finally stop fighting, you will see how wonderful it is. The days that followed were a battle within my own mind. I returned to work because I did not know what else to do, sitting in the dispatch center as more alerts came through, watching the text scroll across the screens and feeling the pull of understanding at the edges of my consciousness. I began to hear the language even when the alerts were not playing. Whispers at the edge of perception, sounds that might have been words if I listened closely enough. I found myself speaking along with the broadcast without meaning to, my lips forming sounds that my mind did not recognize. But I refused to go back to the water treatment plant. I refused to sit in those chairs and let whatever was happening to the others happen to me. I did not know why resistance mattered, only that it did. Only that giving in felt like dying, even if everyone who had surrendered seemed happier than they had ever been. I was alone now, the last person in Cedar Brook who had not accepted the invitation. Everyone else smiled at me with patient understanding, as though they were waiting for an inevitability that I was too foolish to see. The final alert came at exactly midnight. Every device in town activated simultaneously. Not just the usual screens and speakers, but streetlights, car alarms, even the emergency sirens that had not been tested in years. The broadcast was different this time. The voice was clearer, more defined, as though whatever was speaking had moved closer. The text on the screens had changed too, the characters now forming something that almost looked like words I could read. If I just concentrated, if I just let go of my resistance for one moment. But the map at the end was what made my heart stop. It did not show the water treatment plant or any other location in town. It showed the sky, a single point directly overhead, marked in red, with a time displayed beneath it. 3 a.m, tonight. I looked at my watch. I had 3 hours. I left my apartment and walked through the streets of Cedar Brook. The town was awake, every light on, every door open. People emerged from their homes and walked in silence towards the center of town, toward the main square where the old courthouse stood. I followed them, not because I wanted to, but because I could not think of anything else to do. I was carried along by the crowd, hundreds of people moving with a single purpose, their faces peaceful, their eyes turned towards the sky. In the square, they gathered in concentric circles around the courthouse lawn. I found myself near the center, surrounded by familiar faces, all of them looking upward with expressions of anticipation. The broadcast continued to play from every speaker in town, the voice counting down in that impossible language, marking the time until something arrived. Louise found me in the crowd and stood beside me. "You are still fighting," she said. "Even now, even at the end." I could not speak. My throat had closed up, choked with fear, and something else, something that might have been grief for a world that was about to end. "It is not an ending," Louise said, as though reading my thoughts. "It is a beginning. You will see." At 3 a.m, the sky changed. Not gradually, not with any warning, but all at once, as though someone had switched off one reality and switched on another. The stars disappeared, replaced by something my mind could not process. A presence, vast and incomprehensible, hovering above Cedar Brook like a second sky. I could not see it clearly. Every time I tried to focus on it, my vision blurred, my thoughts scattered. It was there and not there, visible and invisible, occupying a space that should not have existed. The broadcast reached its crescendo. The voice spoke a final phrase, something that sounded like a greeting, or perhaps a command. And then the people of Cedar Brook began to change. I watched as my neighbors, my friends, everyone I had ever known in this town began to dissolve. Not painfully, not violently, but peacefully, their bodies becoming less solid, less defined, rising upward toward the presence in the sky like smoke from a dying fire. They were smiling. All of them were smiling. Louise turned to me one last time. Her body had already begun to fade, her outline blurring against the night. "Come with us," she said. "Do not be left behind." She reached for my hand, but her fingers passed through mine without touching. And then she was gone, rising with the others, joining whatever waited above. I stood in the empty square as the sun rose over Cedar Brook. The presence in the sky had departed, taking everyone with it, everyone except me. I walked through the abandoned streets, past empty houses and silent shops. Cars sat in driveways that would never be used again. Coffee cooled in cups on tables where people had been sitting hours before. The town was intact, preserved exactly as it had been, except that there was no one left to inhabit it. I was alone. Over the following days, I monitored the news from other towns, other cities. At first, there was nothing unusual. The world continued as it always had, unaware of what had happened in Cedar Brook. But slowly, reports began to surface. Strange emergency alerts in languages no one recognized. Small towns going silent, their residents vanishing overnight. The same pattern repeating, spreading outward from rural communities to suburbs to cities. Cedar Brook was just the beginning. The first town to receive the invitation, the first to accept it, but not the last. Whatever had taken my neighbors was now taking others, moving across the country, across the world, harvesting everyone who heard the broadcast and accepted its call. And those who resisted, like me, were left behind. The last alert I received came 1 week after the arrival. It appeared on my phone while I sat alone in the empty dispatch center. The text was in English this time, clear and readable, as though whatever was sending the messages had finally learned my language. The message was simple. We will return for the stubborn ones. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Everyone joins eventually. We can wait. We have waited before. I stared at the message until my phone screen went dark. Then I stood, walked out of the dispatch center, and got in my car. I am driving away from Cedar Brook as I share this account. I do not know where I am going. I do not know if there is anywhere left that has not been touched by the alerts, anywhere the broadcasts have not reached. I only know that I cannot stay in that empty town, surrounded by the ghosts of everyone I ever knew. I am passing through other towns that might already be empty, past cities that might be next. The radio plays static, occasionally interrupted by fragments of that impossible language, reminders that whatever is out there has not forgotten about me. I am sharing this as a warning. If you receive an emergency alert in a language you do not recognize, do not listen to it. Do not try to understand it. Do not let yourself feel the pull of acceptance that everyone else felt. Turn off your devices. Leave your town. Drive as far as you can and do not look back, because they are coming. They are coming for all of us, and those of us who resist will be the last ones left. alone in a world emptied of everyone we ever loved, waiting for the day when they decide to come back and finish what they started. I do not know how much time we have. I do not know if resistance is even possible in the end. But I know that I am not ready to join them. Not yet. Not willingly. So I keep driving. I keep running. I keep fighting. And I hope that somewhere out there, someone else is fighting too. Have you received an alert yet? Have you heard that voice speaking in words that almost make sense? If you have not, you will. Everyone will, eventually. And when you do, you will have to make a choice. Accept the invitation and join the others wherever they have gone. Or resist and be left behind in a world that grows emptier every day. I cannot tell you which choice is right. I cannot even tell you if there is a right choice. I can only tell you what I chose, and I can only hope that I do not regret it.